Sophie Calder had exactly 3 rules when it came to dating. No liars, no charmers, no rich men. She'd learned the 3rd one the hard way. Growing up working in her mother's bakery, Sophie had seen wealthy customers treat people like furniture, useful only when they wanted something, invisible the moment they didn't. And when she finally dated a man well off, he'd proven her worst fear true. Money didn't make someone generous, it made them careless. So now, at 28, juggling 2 part-time jobs and carrying an optimism made of stubbornness, Sophie had sworn off every man who tried to impress her with status or money, which is exactly why she didn't know what to make of the tall, quietly intense stranger who kept sitting at the far corner table of her evening cafe shift. He always ordered the same thing: black coffee, no sugar, and a small lemon tart he never finished but always paid for. And he watched her not in a way that made her skin crawl, but in a way that made her wonder if he was thinking as hard as she always was. Tonight, as the cafe lights dimmed and the last customers trickled out, he approached the counter. His voice was steady, warm. "Rough day?" Sophie didn't look up immediately. She was wiping down the espresso machine, tired enough to fall asleep standing. "Honestly," she said, "all my days are rough, but this one wasn't terrible." When she finally glanced at him, she noticed his eyes first deep-set, thoughtful, and surprisingly gentle. He wasn't the polished type with flashy watches or cologne that announced itself. He wore a plain charcoal jacket and a simple shirt, his hair slightly tousled like he'd run a hand through it too many times. "Good," he said softly. "I'm glad it wasn't terrible." She hesitated. "You always say things like that." "Only when I mean them." Sophie blinked, caught off guard. He offered a small, almost shy smile. "I'm Rowan Hale." "Sophie," she said. "Sophie," he repeated, as if testing it. "Would it be strange if I asked you out for coffee, somewhere other than the place you work?" Her heart stuttered, not because she wasn't interested, but because he was too calm, too composed, too something, dangerously close to the type she avoided. She crossed her arms gently. "I don't date customers." Rowan nodded, unfazed. "Fair enough." "And I don't date men like you." He raised an eyebrow. "Men like me?" Sophie gestured vaguely at his posture, his watch-free wrist, his quietly confident presence. "The polished ones, the ones who hide things, the ones who look like they have money." Rowan's mouth twitched, as though her last word hit him harder than she realized. "I'm not polished," he said calmly. "You look like someone who doesn't worry about bills," she replied, too tired to be embarrassed. He held her gaze for a long, unreadable moment. Then he said, "I worry about plenty." "And the money part?" Rowan hesitated. Not long enough to be suspicious, but just long enough to be honest. "I'm comfortable," he said carefully, "not extravagant." Sophie nodded, satisfied. "Good, because I don't date rich men." Rowan opened his mouth, closed it, then let out the softest breath. "Noted," he said quietly. But inside, something in him tightened because Rowan Hale wasn't just comfortable. He wasn't just doing well. He wasn't even upper middle class. Rowan Hale was the billionaire CEO of Hale Industries, one of the most successful engineering companies on the East Coast. Features had been written about him. Photos had been taken. Numbers had been whispered. But Sophie didn't know any of that, and Rowan needed to keep it that way. For once, he wanted to be seen without the shadow of his net worth. For once, he wanted someone to meet him, not the headlines, not the prestige, not the power. And Sophie Calder, with her tired eyes and stubborn heart, was the first woman in his life who'd look him dead in the eye and say, "I don't date rich men." So Rowan made a decision. He wouldn't lie, but he wouldn't tell everything either. Not yet. He'd let her get to know the version of him that existed before money ever mattered. The version he missed being. "I'll walk you home," he said softly, "if you'll let me." Sophie hesitated, studying him. Her instinct usually flared when a man was bad news. But Rowan didn't set off alarms. He set off something else, something quieter, gentler, more dangerous in its sincerity. "Okay," she said, "but no flirting." "I'll behave," he said. He did. He walked beside her in the cool night air, hands tucked in his jacket, telling her small stories about growing up in a noisy neighborhood, about fixing broken radios as a kid, about liking lemon tarts even though he never finished them. Every story was true, just not the whole story. By the time they reached her apartment building, Sophie felt an ache in her chest she didn't recognize. Rowan turned to her, hesitant. "Can I see you again?" She should have said no, should have remembered her own rules, should have stopped this before it began. But instead, she whispered, "Yes." Rowan's breath exhaled shakily, relief flooding his features. He had won her first yes without money. Now he needed to win the truth. Sophie woke the next morning with a feeling she hadn't let herself feel in years, anticipation. She told herself it was silly. It was just coffee, just conversation, just a quiet, gentle man who looked at her like she was worth listening to. Nothing dangerous, nothing romantic. Yet her stomach fluttered every time she remembered Rowan's soft laugh, or the way he walked one step behind her, protective without making it obvious, or the way he never once glanced at his phone. He had given her his full attention, rare, precious, unfamiliar. She tried to shake it off, but the flutter followed her all the way into the cafe for her morning shift. He wasn't supposed to be there, but he was. Sitting in his usual corner, hands wrapped around a cup of black coffee he likely hadn't touched because his eyes were on the door waiting for her. The moment she entered, he stood, and something warm loosened in her chest. "You're early," she said, unable to hide the small smile tugging at her lips. "Couldn't sleep," Rowan admitted. "I kept thinking you'd change your mind." Sophie blinked. "Why would I do that?" He hesitated. "Because most things in my life disappear when people think too long about them." The sadness in his voice, so quiet, so unguarded, made her heart ache. "Well," she said softly, "I'm not disappearing." Rowan's jaw relaxed, as if those 4 words meant more to him than she realized. They walked together after her shift, strolling through the Saturday market, weaving between flower stands and pastry stalls. Rowan bought her a honey bun, but insisted she choose it. Sophie laughed at how intensely he watched her pick it out, almost like it mattered more than corporate decisions. He wasn't trying to impress her. He was trying to understand her. "So," she said playfully, "what exactly do you do for work? You always dodge the question." Rowan tensed, not visibly, but Sophie felt it. "I manage an engineering firm," he said carefully. "Manage?" Sophie narrowed her eyes. "Like a team. More like the whole company." "Ah," she grinned. "So you're the boss. That tracks." Rowan exhaled, relieved she didn't pry further. But Sophie wasn't oblivious. She saw how his gaze shifted away, how he swallowed before answering, how every mention of work made him retreat a little. She didn't know why he held back, but she sensed he wasn't lying, just hiding. Hours passed. Laughter came easier. Smiles lingered longer, and when Rowan finally walked her home again, the sun setting behind them, Sophie realized she didn't want the day to end. At her door, Rowan paused. "Sophie, can I tell you something?" She nodded. His voice dropped to a whisper, gentle, nervous, sincere. "I like you more than I should. And I don't want to mess this up by telling you everything too fast." Sophie's breath caught. "Rowan, you don't have to impress me." "I'm not trying to," he said. I'm afraid if you know who I really am, you'll walk away." She frowned softly. "Why would I walk away?" His eyes flickered with vulnerability. "Because you said you don't date rich men." Sophie froze. The world went still. Rowan swallowed hard. "Sophie, I'm not comfortable. I'm not middle class. You're wealthy," she whispered, realization hitting her like a cold wave. He nodded slowly. "Very." Silence fell, thick, heavy, sharp, not because he lied, but because fate had a cruel sense of humor. Sophie stepped back, not far, but enough that Rowan's heart visibly sank. "You should have told me," she whispered. "I wanted you to know me first," Rowan said, voice breaking. "Not my bank account, not the headlines, me." Sophie looked at him, really looked, and saw the fear, trembling behind his calm. He wasn't manipulating her. He was terrified of losing her. Slowly, she exhaled. "Rowan, I said I don't date rich men." He nodded, bracing for the blow. "But maybe," she continued softly, stepping closer again, "I could date you." His breath caught. "I just need one promise," she whispered. "Anything," he said, voice trembling. "No more hiding." Rowan's eyes warmed with relief, so deep it looked like gratitude. "No more hiding," he said, taking her hand gently. "Only the truth, only us." And for the first time in a long time, Sophie broke her own rule, not for money, not for status, but for a man who finally showed her something real.